Thank you, Jim. And it was great working with you and the others on this FAO letter. It was pretty fun sticking our finger in their eye. But it's my honor to join you tonight. Um, Before we get started, just a quick word about the CO2 Coalition. We're 200, nearly 200 of the top scientists, engineers, energy experts in the world. And you might recognize some of these that sit on our board. Patrick Moore actually hired me in 2020 when Will Happer, our current chair, had stepped down to join the Trump administration. Patrick, of course, was a co-founder of Greenpeace. He sits on our board. Dr. John Clauser, Nobel laureate 22 in physics, on our board. And I think you're all familiar with Dr. William Happer of Princeton, eminent uh, physicist. Uh, we'll talk the CO2. You might be familiar, and probably are familiar, about what we do in terms of scientific articles, reports, publications, commentaries. Behind the scenes, may not be aware of some of the things we'll talk about here tonight. Uh, we're we hired our senior legal advisor, Chuck Weller, a couple of years ago, and he's been leading our efforts to construct comments for regulatory reform. And so, under federal regulatory reform here in the United States, we're blessed to have a lot of things going on, rolling back overreaching regulations. We'll focus here on the most important one, which is the Environmental Protection Agency's endangerment finding. We'll talk a bit about that. Then you mentioned the United Nations Food and Agricultural Organization. There are actually two meetings. There's one in Rome and one in Spain. We'll talk a little bit about that. And then we're challenging the national and global scientific societies on their climate change policies. For regulatory reform, the focus here, all of this, the harmful nonsense, is all being driven by this demonization of CO2. They call it the demon molecule. We call it the miracle molecule. And our unofficial motto here at the CO2 Coalition is we love CO2 and so should you. This is a pull-up banner we have when we go to conferences that people's heads explode when the alarmists see that. We've also gone so far as creating billboards around the United States with this message. And again, heads explode as the fearmongers drive past the billboards. Uh, and in 2024, before we get into the endangerment finding and regulatory reform, there were two huge cases at the United States Supreme Court that has really changed uh, how they legislate and rule on climate change matters. The first, uh, on June 28th, was the Loper Bright Enterprises. It's called Chevron deference, and that was established a number of years ago that if a regulatory agency was proposing a regulation, then there was deference given to that regulatory agency because they were expected to be experts. And we all know that that's not quite so. But the day before that ruling was one that we're relying on. It's called Ohio versus EPA. And this is the legal theory, and we're using this in all of our comments. It's based on the Supreme Court State Farm decision. And what it does, this is really important, if an agency, any any regulation that's enacted is unlawful if it fails to consider an important aspect of the problem. And that's what the endangerment finding did. That's what all these regulations, they don't look at the benefits of increasing CO2. They don't look at the benefits of warming, and they only look at catastrophic alternatives. And they've not been considering all aspects. All of our comments, and these comments need to be considered when there's regulations imposed or proposed or repealed. If there's an important aspect in our comments, the regulatory agency has to consider it based on this new rule. And they're all created by our senior legal advisor, Chuck Weller, who creates these with Richard Lindzen and William Happer. And all of them rely on this State Farm strategy. And we're doing this because we believe that each of these are going to end up at the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court will make the decision, and we've created, or actually Chuck has created, our comments that are fairly lengthy to be used at the Supreme Court based on science. So we've been fighting decades of fierce headwinds, and you're still experiencing that in Ireland, the UK, the EU, New Zealand, Australia. You're still facing these fierce headwinds. Uh, but everything here in the US has changed. And this was the day we started winning bigly. It was January 20th. Things have changed enormously since Mr. Trump was elected. It's been everything on climate change it's been remarkable and it's going quick. And now here we got the wind at our backs. It feels like a gale force wind. I spoke to Steve Koonin not too long ago. Will Happer and I did, and those are the words he used. He said we've been facing fierce headwinds, and now we've got the wind at our back, and it feels, according to Steve, he says it feels like a gale force wind blowing us forward. Uh, and we talked, Jim and I talked a little bit ahead of this, that looking at this, we're so blessed here in the United States to be experiencing this. Things have changed so quickly for us. I've been optimistic for some time. I see that it's going to take this, what we're seeing in the United States, hopefully it's a harbinger for the rest of the world, that we can be a guiding light for the rest of the world to get to embrace climate change truth and the science that backs it. And so what is the Environmental Protection Agency? Well, the first thing they did, 9 days after Trump was elected, the Environmental Protection Agency dismissed every single one of the members of their Science Advisory Board and Clean Air Scientific Advisory Committee. And since we have quite a stable of some of the top experts in the world, they opened up the nomination process. And we nominated 50 highly qualified experts to fill in these APA boards. And E&E News, for example, here the fearmongers didn't like what we were doing very much. Here they called us out actually, complaining about the CO2 Coalition, the science denying group, uh, for having nominated far more people to these boards than anyone else. And so I wore that as a badge of honor. Um, and then not long after that, Donald Trump issued an executive order to end Biden's crackdown on household appliances. And what he said was to return to common sense standards, and applause to him for that. And so what we've got here in the United States, and I'm sure worldwide, were these regulations that were restricting what you could buy, uh, ceiling fans, washers, dryers, what you can drive, how to heat your home, what temperature to heat or cool your home. Uh, Incandescent light bulbs were banned, and much more. And what they wanted to do was what they were proud of was, well, now your dishwasher is highly efficient. And by that, they meant that it used less electricity and less water. Um, my wife disputes that. Her definition of an efficient dishwasher is one that can wash them in 30 minutes and get them clean, not 2.5 to 4 hours like the dishwashers today. So her definition of efficiency is quite a bit different than the government's. But what the government has done is to systematically restrict the freedom to choose what kind of appliance to buy. You're only allowed now to buy government approved devices. No matter, and hopefully that's going to change. Hopefully we'll be able to buy shower heads that don't have flow restrictors, uh, and much, much more. And so the endangerment finding, this is the base of the house of cards this whole thing is based on. Uh, and EPA, Lee Zeldin is the administrator of EPA, on June 17th announced that they were going to repeal the endangerment finding. And what is the endangerment finding? In 2009, it was the first step in the Obama Biden administration's overreaching climate agenda. That's cost people here in the United States trillions and worldwide trillions of dollars. All of it's based on this aversion and fear that carbon dioxide emissions were leading to climate crisis and dangerous and unprecedented warming. And so if we can knock this out, if we pull that first card out from this house of cards, the entire the entire house of cards will fall. And it's happening in real time right now. And we are part of it. There were four reasons what we've used. Chuck Weller, our senior advisor, has proposed. Again, we're creating these comments, and the comment for the endangerment finding. He's working diligently on one, and I'm doing a separate one along with Angela Wheeler back in our Fairfield, Virginia office, who's listening in right now, I hope. But we're working together to do a second one on human health and climate change. But we're using four pillars here to repeal it. One, it's based on unscientific evidence. Also, it failed to consider the physics that demonstrates that CO2 will have a minimal effect on temperature. It failed to consider any of the benefits of carbon dioxide, and it failed to consider that eliminating carbon dioxide and fossil fuels will have disastrous effects worldwide. So we're preparing right now a second comment by the CO2 Coalition in support of the repeal of the endangerment finding. This was first published in 2016 by Wes Allen, who's a member in Australia. It's an extensive, he graciously and courageously several weeks ago agreed to an update of this to bring it up to date from 2016. But it was a lot of work for him. He's not retired. He's still a physician full time in Australia. And he took this on, did a wonderful update. We'll be publishing that hopefully later this week. And Jim, you'll be able to perhaps share a link to this publication when it's done. It's really good. At 48 pages, again, it's climate change and health, which directly has to do with the endangerment finding that found that increasing CO2 was endangering the public's health. And so what's likely to happen with this is, again, this was announced June 17th. Comments are due in a few days here, and we'll get those done and out. A lot of people have already filed their comments. Again, these comments are very important because they have to be considered now based on those new Supreme Court regulations. They have to consider any substantive comments, which ours are. So the EPA will then review the comments probably over a 2 or 3 or 4 month period. And then likely they'll say, well, thank you all for submitting your comments. We've taken a look at this and we still believe that the endangerment finding will be repealed, should be repealed. They'll then be sued by the Environmental Defense Fund or one of the other climate bedwetter groups. And what that will be then heard, it will be heard in the Fifth Circuit Court of Washington, D.C., which is wildly liberal. And that court will probably rule against the EPA, and then that will lead to the EPA appealing it to the Supreme Court, where hopefully we will be able to come in with our material. And so this will end up, along with the other regulations that are moving forward. We didn't go through, there was a lot. There was the Clean Power Plant rule that we've commented on. There were some others. But the big dog here is the endangerment finding. And again, everything that we have done here at the CO2 Coalition in terms of this has all been being led by our senior legal advisor. And all of what we're arguing is with the understanding that it will be used at the Supreme Court. And we're pretty confident that it will probably be win the day at the Supreme Court because of their previous rulings last year. So it's an exciting time for us. It's not going to move quickly. But this hopefully will get going here in a bit. Jim, you talked about the United Nations Food and Agriculture Organization's global conference on sustainable livestock transformation. And the title was Fostering Change, Scaling Innovations, Driving Solutions. Uh, there were a group of distinguished agriculture and livestock experts around the world, from Paraguay to Spain to New Zealand, that participated in the creation of a letter. And we had an appendix that was quite detailed that was attached to it. And I was proud to be one of the lead signatory on this. And we posted from the CO2 Coalition to Bruno Telemans from the UN's FAO. And of course, we heard nothing back, and which is par for the course. But it was quite it was a month and a half of work that, or it felt like 3 months. But we find it's tough. It's difficult to get 12 or 15 scientists to agree completely on anything, but we did. And Will Happer commends it as just a wonderful piece of work. So it's something we can rely on. And perhaps you could share that, Jim, with your people there. But there's also what came out of this was there's another Second World Congress on Sustainable Livestock Farming that will also be held in November in Spain. And the organization's part of the FAO. Its president, though, is Camino Limia, who signed our open letter to the FAO complaining and taking them to task for their climate change stance on livestock. And because she signed that agreement now, they were holding this Congress in Spain. The FAO reports, or the Camino reports that they are losing their sponsors because the sponsors don't want to have anything to do with a climate denier running a conference. So we've agreed at the CO2 to step in and partly sponsor this. We're also sponsoring the travel of a gentleman from New Zealand representing the New Zealand Sustainable Livestock uh, group that's there that's very active. Also, Will Happer will be traveling and attending as a guest speaker. So we will be represented here, uh, we being us as climate skeptics and climate realists. So we will have a good representation at this meeting. And also, I'll be traveling to New York City here in a couple of weeks to sit down, have do a documentary, part of a documentary with a gentleman by the name of John Stossel, who's well known here as for a very huge following. And we'll be talking about beef and sustainability and climate and methane. And one of the things that fell out of this that it's interesting when we talk about sustainable livestock is that uh, here in North America, uh, around 1800, there were about the same amount of buffalo as there are cattle today in the United States. And those buffalo also are ruminants, just like the cattle, and they belch methane just like the cattle. So even before we were growing cattle, there was about the same methane being produced by just a different type of ruminant. And it's that it's because as the ruminants, the cattle, the buffalo, the deer, the elk, eat the grass, which is mostly cellulose. That cellulose is indigestible to you and me and just about every animal on earth except for these ruminants. And they can digest the cellulose that's in the grasses. And because of that, it's they're one of their four stomachs is airtight. There's no air, and it creates methane in the part of the process. So as they're breaking down the cellulose, they're creating methane, which then is released via belching. And so that's a little known fact there. But there's a lot that's fascinating. We work with Will Happer to get uh, just how tiny the amount of warming potential there is from from methane from cattle. We're also the CO2 Coalition is also uh, launched a pretty significant effort. We're contacting a number of all the main scientific societies in the United States. We're looking at their climate change policies and informing them what they get wrong. It turns out the American Association for the Advancement of Science is the big dog here in the United States, and forms a loose coalition with 17 other societies. And in 2009, which again was the same year that the endangerment finding was created, they sent a letter to all United States senators, just full of misinformation about why they needed to rein in not methane, carbon dioxide, and how global warming and climate change it was put us in great peril. Uh, and so we've taken that. They doubled down again this spring in May by advancing the same lies as they did back then in 2009. And so we've sent all of the presidents of the 18 societies detailed information. Of course, we've yet to hear back from any of them. We also sent a similar record to the letter and documentation to the Pontifical Academy of Sciences in the Vatican. Uh, that was hand delivered actually by one of our members, Greg Goodnight, who also delivered a copy of my new book to the Vatican Pontifical Academy of Sciences, and they get a lot wrong. They need to stick with saving men's and women's souls and stay out of the science business. It's I don't have the quote from Pope John Paul, but he had a wonderful quote about just that. That things went terribly wrong many centuries ago, and it's gone wrong here again. Um, so we're doing our part, trying to inform the world about this. One of the things I'm most proud of what we've done here at the CO2 Coalition, we do science, we do reports. Uh, we had people that were, our members were very concerned that our children, the science education in America and around the world, that our children were being indoctrinated into a climate cult. They were being taught consensus science and groupthink. They were not being taught the scientific method or critical thinking skills. And we've actually done something about it. We formed an education committee. We've now got a series of educational, illustrated educational books that tackle various things that they're being taught. We've also brought on our senior science or senior education advisor, Dr. Sharon Camp, who is a PhD in analytic chemistry. She was an AP science teacher. She creates all of our lesson plans to go along with these. And the one on the right that you see is my latest book. It's called Chloe the Clownfish Sleeps Well. And it tells the story of a clownfish that lives on the Great Barrier Reef. And I collaborated with Dr. Peter Ridd to create this book. It's a wonderful story and a wonderful method to tell the truth about what's actually happening on the Great Barrier Reef. And so uh, we also attended the National Science Teaching Association's annual convention. We had a double booth there, lots of traffic, and we took a look at their climate policy, and we published a report on the day we showed up. It was called uh, Challenging the NSTA's Position Statement on Climate Change. They did not like that. They did not like that one little bit. And the very next day, we had just distributed the last of our materials because they were in great demand. And the head of the NSTA showed up and said, "You need to remove all your materials." And I said, "Well, we're not going to do that." And he said, "You can't do this. You need to." And this is how this is an example of how they silence us. They kicked us out of the convention. No one I've ever talked to has ever seen anything like it. Now, this was our team of climate change warriors that were there. That's Dr. Sharon Camp, PhD in chemistry. Dr. Rafaela Nascimento, PhD chemistry. I'm a geologist. Angela Wheeler is our VP of marketing and multimedia. They kicked these scientists out of there. Probably the only two PhD scientists in the entire building. And so That's how they do. That's what they do. They silence you. They didn't say any of what we were doing was wrong. You just can't say it. Uh, I like to go through in the next 10 minutes or so, 15 minutes. Uh, I've got a new book, A Very Convenient Warming, How Modest Warming and More CO2 Are Benefiting Humanity. Uh, it's available. You get a look, search for convenient warming on Amazon. I thought with the time we've left, I could show you a few things that are in my book that you may or may not have. I know you've got a very educated audience here, Jim, but let's go through and take a look at a few of these things. Heat waves, fact versus fiction. 5 years ago, this would be the EPA website. If you Googled or searched for EPA and heat waves, this is the chart you would get showing heat waves in the United States to have peaked 80, 90 years ago in the 20s and 30s, uh, and not really increased today. Today, if you look at the EPA, if you search for EPA, look at the EPA for heat waves, this is what you will find. It's called Heat Wave Characteristics in the United States. No, it's not. It's not. You have to go way deep into the text to find out that this is not heat wave index in the United States. It's heat wave index of the 50 largest municipalities in the United States. Of course, you all know, you're smart. You know what the problem with that is. You know that heat has been generated artificially by concrete, asphalt, air conditioners, automobiles. It's the urban heat index, but they don't state that. And this is one example of climate scientific malfeasance is what this is. So these were from the 50 large metropolitan areas. This one on the top left is what it should be. The bottom right is what they're showing you. CO2 versus temperature. Of course, we're being told that CO2 increasing is driving temperature. When you see blue, it's CO2 through time, and the red is temperature. And I've been trying to not impose, but I've suggested we all adopt this as a methodology. Some people use green instead of blue for CO2, which you would think would be okay because of plant growth. Unfortunately, there's a large percentage of men are colorblind. They can't tell the difference between red or green. So if you use blue, you're safe here. So blue is CO2. Just as we started increasing CO2 in the mid 20th century, we went into a 33-year cooling trend, just as it started increasing. If we look at the longer term picture, the Central England temperature record versus carbon, or let's move the y-axis down a little bit. Another way to look at the same data is here, again showing that the warming actually started more than 300 years ago, long before we started adding CO2. Again, a little bit longer term perspective showed that the most recent warm period, the medieval warm period, occurred warmer than today and occurred at very low CO2 levels. And this is good documentation to why CO2 levels are from our emissions of fossil fuels, not from nature. And 8,000 years of temperature shows slowly increasing CO2 and slowly declining. Although it was declining in fits and starts, we saw a decline from the Holocene optimum 8,000, 6,000 years ago. And again, we talk about heads exploding when I put this up when people have never seen this. Global warming does save lives. Uh, Many of you have seen this chart showing Dr. Antonio Gasparini. Another example of scientific malfeasance was this. It was one of the most recent studies. You could tell the scientists that put this together really, really didn't like the results. What they found was that cold kills 10 times as many people as heat. And I looked at this and I said, wait a minute, something's wrong here. This doesn't look right. And went back into it and I looked a little bit closer. If you look closely, and I'll blow it up here for you, you'll see that the x-axis is different for the heat-related deaths and the cold-related deaths. The heat-related deaths on the right, 0 to 50. Cold was 0 to 250. So what they did was exaggerate by 5 times the amount of heat-related deaths. And the other thing that's kind of funny, They only referred to cold-related deaths once, and every time after that, they called them non-optimal temperatures. And that's a good way to get around saying cold-related deaths. Yeah, non-optimal temperatures. So I, uh, I recreated this. The chart on the right is what the chart should have looked like. The chart on the left is what they used. All right. That is scientific malfeasance. That's not how we should do science. That's unacceptable. But that's just another great example of how they twist things. Is their chart that they showed incorrect? No, but they're twisting the data to make it seem that it's incorrect what they did. In glacial retreat, we also see glacial retreat and sea level rise going hand in hand, and we see that both sea level rise and glacial retreat really started in the early 1800s, and by the mid 1800s, the glacial retreat and sea level rise were about the same rate as it is today. But it started in the 1850s. It started warming 100 or 150 years before that. But the key here is it didn't get warm enough until the 1800s for summer ice melt to exceed winter ice accumulation, which is the key. This is a picture of my lovely wife and I up in front of John Muir Glacier, Glacier Bay, Alaska. As we were standing there, the captain of the ship came on the announcement. He said, you can see the calving of the glacier. This is proof of global warming. And I was screaming at him. I go, no, it's not. And so I did this is Glacier Bay. And I took a look at the historical records of where the ice was. Going back to, it's very well documented. In 1760, there was no Glacier Bay. It was completely full of ice. And so we can show where the retreat, where the face of that glacier was since 1760 until now. So this is a great example of are glaciers retreating? Yep, they sure are. Of course they should. Anytime it's warming and we're in a warming trend, glaciers will retreat. When it starts getting cold again, I hope it's not anytime soon, they'll start advancing. And sea level rise, again, began in the 1800s. It's currently rising at about 7 inches per century. Sorry, I'm not using millimeters, Jim, but you'll have to bear with my American terms here. And the Maldives are considered to be by the UN to be the most at-risk island nation in the world. They're going to be underwater by 2050, according to the UN. Is that the case? All right. 18,000 years ago, the Maldives were also just above sea level. And in the last 18,000 years, sea level has risen 400 feet. Why are these islands not under 400 feet of water, you might ask? Good question. And the answer is it's a combination of corals being able to grow very quickly and keep up with sea level, but it's also a geologic term called accretion. It's where the islands actually grow along. It's the sands and the gravels that ring the islands are washed up during storms, and then they're distributed across the island. You can just search for those two words, island accretion, to learn more about it. And so there are critters that move the sands around. Our next Sleep Well book is called Foxy the Fruit Bat Sleeps Well, about a fruit bat that it lives on the Maldives. And one of the interesting aspects here was that the parrotfish eat the corals. And according to Peter Ridd, some 80% of the sands and gravels around the islands are actually parrotfish poop. And my 12-year-old grandson just loved that when I told him that. But the middle school boys, they like when you hear stuff like that. But it's actually because they eat the corals, comes in one end and out the other. And but it helps the islands grow. And so this is just so what they're telling you is that the last 400 feet of sea level rise didn't put them underwater, but the next 2 inches, which is what it will be in 2050, will put them underwater. Well, that just doesn't meet the smell test. The common sense tells you that's just not so. And in addition, there's a construction boom going on with 20 plus resorts being constructed. for airports. All of these are insured by multinational insurance companies that avoid risk like the plague. These insurance companies would not be insuring these if they thought they would be underwater in a few years or a couple of decades. Again, it doesn't meet the smell test. And again, let's just talk a little bit about consensus. We know Michael Crichton said there's no such thing as consensus science. If it's consensus, it isn't science. If it's science, it isn't consensus. And my favorite consensus quote was Richard Feynman, the noted Nobel laureate physics. I would rather have questions that can't be answered than answers that can't be questioned. And I'll leave you with that.